Now, I've been looking forward to doing this. Can we go back to the future? In 1995, the amazing BBC's Tomorrow World programme decided to predict what the world would look like in 30 years. Those 30 years have scarily now elapsed. It is now 2025. Now, the show, which no longer broadcast, featured one of the most famous scientists of the age, Professor, and every other, I suppose, accolade, Stephen Hawking, who predicted by 2025 we can expect big changes. Now, the programme team agreed, suggesting a raft of world-shaking innovations from hologram surgery to space junk gel. So here to help with some of this expertise and has the benefit of 3 decades of hindsight, let's look at how much of what Tomorrow's World said was successfully anticipated. And we're joined here by the co-hosts of the podcast Tomorrow's World Audit Time, Russ Cope and Mark Agnew. Lads, why am I getting such a kick out of this? Russ, I'll start with you. Why is this absolutely brilliant? Why do I want to know what people said and what came true? And more importantly, I suppose in my head, what didn't come true?
Well, hi, Connor. This is a particularly interesting episode because it's not a regular episode of Tomorrow's World at all. Normally, they just show you these small innovations every week. But with this one, we're actually pretending that we are in the future. So what we're seeing in this episode is we're actually seeing what people in 1995 thought that 2025 was actually going to be like. So the program is presented from the perspective of people in 2025. So as we are in 2025, we can look at this episode and go and actually really judge it by our modern standards and see.
Oh, and we're going to do that. Believe me, we're going to do that over the next, hopefully all things going well, over the next 45 minutes. Mark, there is something lovely about being able to look back at predictions. I kind of used The Simpsons as a yardstick for this because The Simpsons have done a pretty good job over the wider scope of things, of predicting things that would happen. How has Tomorrow's World done, sort of generally? Let's not talk about this episode just yet, because I have a little bit of Tomorrow's World royalty coming up in a second. But how does Tomorrow's World do in comparison to something like The Simpsons?
Oh, gosh. Well, I mean, for a start, that's what a great comparison. I don't know if Tomorrow's World has ever been compared to The Simpsons before in that way. I think, in general, I think we really enjoy. I mean, we've been doing this for about 3 years, and we've really, really enjoyed the fact that you go into it, and you bear in mind how long it was broadcasted for. I think there was over 1,400 episodes, so there was a lot they threw out there. And I think the hit rate has been pretty solid. There's been some phenomenal and highly entertaining misses, but the ambition of the program throughout all the years it was broadcast was astounding. And I think this is what I liked about this one. Russell was talking about what it is. We're like time travelers with this episode. I was alive in 1995. I probably watched this, and you remember, the fact that you get to go back and see how you thought things were going to be, and now we have the opportunity to directly compare it. I think it's just, to me, it's really exciting. But in general, to be honest, Connor, I think the show did pretty good. I mean, when you're brave like Tomorrow's World, you're not going to hit everything, but they hit quite a lot. That's what we're finding anyway.
Russ, I like that. I like that thought because of being alive in 1985. And I remember where I was. I remember being at school. I remember what I was watching on TV. What did you think 1995, going 30 years into the future to 2025, was going to look like? Just for you, for your perspective. And I'll ask Mark the same question in a second.
Well, obviously, firstly, I assumed I would be a multi-millionaire. That would be the first thing, but on a personal level. But I would say that I just discovered the internet in 1995, so I was already aware of how exciting that was. So I think a lot of my sort of projections would have been based around the internet and what it could do. I've always been a big fan of space travel, so I would have probably expected there to be bit more space stuff going on than there is these days. Although the SpaceX stuff is these days is quite good now, but yeah, sort of mostly space and internet based things, I think.
Mark, what about you? I'll tell you mine in a wee second, right? Because there is no wrong answer in this, by the way. I'll tell you how ridiculous mine was. So, Mark, what did you think was going to happen by 2025?
I'm not as egotistical as Russ. I think I probably knew I wasn't going to be a multi-millionaire. So I think we'll put that to one side. I think I probably feel more like an adult than I actually do. I still don't feel like an adult all these years later. But I think in general, I genuinely expected things to be more peaceful and better than they are, I suppose. I think when 95 I was 14. That was like the Britpop summer. That was a really exciting time for me, and I remember kind of looking ahead to the future and being really positive, just like really optimistic, and a lot of fantastic things have happened to me. I'm very happy. I live a good life, but I think in general there is that kind of sense of like, hasn't quite been as lovely as we all hoped.
I remember my brother having an argument with somebody in and around this period. I can't say it was directly 1995, but it wasn't too far off it. It wasn't that long after the World Cup in 1984, which, Mark, I'm going to guess you're an Irish fan as well,
yes,
like myself. Yeah. So it was in and around that time. I remember my brother having a massive row with a friend of ours, and he was talking about flying cars. And I very rarely fell on my brother's side of arguments, right? He's a year older than me. We had that sort of bumping heads thing as we grew up. But I remember at the time absolutely steadfastly saying, my brother was right. My big brother is right. We will have some sort of flying car. And now we have those, like, we see those helicopter drones every now and again that pop up on the internet that somebody's trying to sell them. It's the closest thing you get to a flying car. But Russ and Mark, tell me, why have we no flying cars? What's the deal, lads?
Because it would be unbelievably dangerous. Imagine them all dropping out of the sky. It would be horrific.
What's a three-dimensional car crash look like? I don't think it's good.
No, it's not. Now, I'm going back to my young fella as in 1985. Perhaps it was more stupid than I actually thought. Before we go through the episode in mind, right? It's an episode where they sat down and said, this is what it's going to be like in 2025. It is 2025 now. Lads, the three of us collectively together, we should all genuflect. That's okay. We should all get down. Just give a wee bow before we break it all down. Let's see if this works. I'm delighted to be joined by the legendary presenter of Tomorrow's World, Howard Stableford. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for doing this late or this early in the morning on the second day of the year. Happy New Year, my friend.
Happy New Year, Connor. Thank you very much for inviting me on. Happy New Year to Mark and Russ as well. I'm delighted to be able to speak to Mark and Russ because I've listened to their podcasts over the last few years, and what they tend to spend and specialise in is taking the mickey out of what I'm wearing.
Caught, lads. Absolutely caught, lads. Hook, line and sinker. Russ and Mark, it would be remiss of me not to allow you to respond to such an allegation from a televisual legend.
Oh, come on, Howard.
shocked.
There are some really spectacular outfits over the years, weren't there? Did you choose them yourself?
We did have a little bit of help from the BBC wardrobe department. I was thinking about this particular show, though, because we all decided, to think about it. It looks like, from 1995's perspective, if you look at the visuals, we've decided that everybody wears beige in 2025.
Yes.
And I decided that I'd wear glasses. Well, I wear glasses for reading, but I don't wear them normally. And I decided to have a comb over as well. I decided to put a high part. And what I missed was I really wish I'd made them put a bald thing on my head, so that I was bald with those tufts on the side. That's what I really should have done. I missed a trick there.
Mad Professor vibes. Is that what you were looking for? Doc Brown from Back to the Future, ironically.
Exactly. That would have worked beautifully, yeah.
It was an incredible programme. It ran for such a long time. Why, and Russ and Mark both alluded to it there now, why did you have such a good hit rate of getting things relatively perfect sometimes?
Well, from my perspective, it was the incredible work done by producers, assistant producers, and the networks that they built amongst industry, amongst companies, amongst universities, amongst researchers and academics, so that we were very well informed when we went into kind of writing scripts and creating something for television as to what was down the path. And of course, we'd get the perspectives of of industries and academics to see what they thought were going to be the future ramifications as technology and science was introduced. So it was very well researched, I'd say.
What were your highlights from your entire time there? You were there 1985 to 1997. So what were the things that you predicted? And again, in a few minutes, we will focus more on 1985 right through to 2025. But what were the things across the entire time you were there that really you think about and go, yeah, that was a really special one to get right?
I think it was there were many things that just stand out. But I was reflecting on this today, thinking because you invited me onto this program, and one of the things that we talked about a lot was recognition, was personal recognition. How does the internet, how does this cyber world know it's you? And for a long time, we went down the path of voice recognition. And voice recognition, we had all kinds of things on Tomorrow's World, and Maggie Philbin and I would demonstrate voice recognition, and every time it would fail. And that was because when you're under pressure on live television, your voice slightly changes, and it never worked. It never worked because it was distorted in some way. But the way that we are now, I use here in my laptop in my office my fingerprint to access my banking accounts, my computer itself. I think those are the kinds of things that really are extraordinary. And only today I went to a supermarket without my credit cards, without my phone, no way of paying apart from the palm of my hand. And I simply had to put the palm of my hand over the display, and it said, yep, that's Howard Stableford. We've got a link to your account, and off you go.
It's the future, Howard, some would say. It's the future. Well, look, I know my name's on the top of the door tonight. I know I'm covering for Tony this evening. But, lads, I'm going to take a wee step back. Russ Cope, Mark Agnew, who are co-hosts of the podcast Tomorrow's World Audit Time. The floor is yours. Ask Howard any questions you want. And you can go time about, right? So Russ, then Mark, Russ, then Mark.
Okay, Howard, first question. We've just covered your 1987 Christmas quiz, the one with Rod Hull on it.
Seminal television, top class telly.
Of course, the jumper you're wearing in that is a special Tomorrow's World Christmas jumper. Did you get that specially made?
Yeah, so that became all a bit of a joke. The first time I ever did that it was just a horrible Christmas jumper. And then the next year, we did that quiz for several years. And the next year, they decided, why don't we put some lights in? And then a year after that, the lights got bigger, and they got bigger and bigger until, and it might have been the Rod Hull and Emu program, I'm actually wired into the chair from which I'm presenting. And that thing was boiling hot. It was just kicking off so much heat. So it was a bit of a joke, really, at my expense, as usual.
See, when people tuned into this today, they thought themselves, I'll listen to a wee bit of radio for the new year. You didn't think you would get Tomorrow's World's Howard Stableford talking about Rod Hull and Christmas jumpers at what? midnight on the second day of the year. Absolute gold. Brilliant. Listen, by the way, if you want to send in a question, because we'll have Howard for the next just couple of minutes, right? So send in a question. Be quick. 08085 909 693 if you want to send in a WhatsApp. If you want to text us, 85058. Mark, the floor is yours.
I was just thinking the number of episodes you're on, Howard, and like so many famous things. We even watched one recently where it felt like you're one of the very first people to interview Stephen Hawking, who obviously is in this episode as well, only a few years later, and he's obviously the celebrated, the legend that he became. I suppose my question was there anything that you did in the show that genuinely had you really excited that you then never heard of ever again? Like, was there anything that you kind of thought, this is amazing, and then just nothing?
That's a really good question. First of all, it was extraordinary to be able to talk to Stephen Hawking in his offices at Cambridge University. A total highlight of my career, and I'm sure of many people's careers who were lucky enough to meet him. And when I live in the United States these days, and I talk to a lot of American audiences, and that name is the name that makes everybody gasp and say, wow, you really met him? That's extraordinary. So very, very privileged to have been able to do that. Yeah, there's one invention which I thought, I'm going to back this. I'm going to actually put money into it. And I'm so pleased. It was the one financial thing I did right because I didn't put money into it. But it was the answer to, if you live in a high-rise building, and now we have satellite dishes pointing to the satellites for television, the whole thing becomes an eyesore, looks like a hedgehog or whatever, with the buildings bristling as everybody's got their own dish pointing at the spotlight, at the satellite. So somebody came up with a brilliant idea of, it really was just a series of concentric circles on a transparent blind that you pulled down over your window that was vaguely pointing south. So then there was no eyesores on the side of the building. You didn't need any firmware, hardware like the dishes and whatever. You just had a blind that you pulled down. And I thought that is the answer, not only technologically, but socially as well, to what is a particularly difficult problem. And it went nowhere.
Nowhere. That's incredible.
You get Deborah Meaden and you get your, what do you call your man who does all the podcasts, Stephen Bartlett. You go and tell them now and see what happens. Although the dish is dying, isn't it? The dish is dying, Howard.
Yes,
isn't it?
exactly. Well, exactly, and even then, now, of course, 30 years later, we don't need dishes. We just don't need them.
Go on, I'll give you a couple more each if you want. Russ, if you get a quick one, and then Mark have one quick one, and then we'll allow Howard to go and spend 2025 not getting harangued by three idiots on the radio.
There was a lot of foreign travel on the program throughout the years, and you went to a lot of different destinations all around the world. A lot of them quite exotic and nice looking. Firstly, what was your favourite place you went to? And secondly, how was they sort of divvied up between the presenters? Was there, you have to arm wrestle for it, or toss a coin?
Well, it's a great question. I was always up for everything and wanted to do every foreign trip. And so I got lucky with, as it were, with the Chernobyl nuclear reactor documentary that we made, because Judith was actually slated to do that, and Judith Ham, and she decided she didn't want to go in the end. So I got very lucky with that because it won some, nice international awards for the program we made in 1989, which was 2.5 years after the Chernobyl reactor blew up. But for me, two big. I remember traipsing around the jungles on the Laos Vietnam border looking for traces of the Vu Quang ox. Was it extinct or was it not? And things would happen, like we were supposed to go across a canyon on a bridge across a valley, and they'd taken up this wooden rickety bridge to do something with it. So we had to pay $50 for them to rebuild the bridge so that we could get our jeeps across to the other side of the valley. And meanwhile, we sat back down by the creek next to this woman's house who made us chicken and noodles, and the chicken was dispatched from the backyard. And then, so that's one thing. And then the other one I'll mention is that we did a Siberia special. Of course we did. Of course we did a Siberia special in the middle of winter. And the opening shot was me walking across a frozen Lake Baikal with the Altai Mountains in the background. And it was a big helicopter that took this shot, and they went out of sight and out of hearing distance as well. And they said to me, just keep walking in this direction and we'll come in very slowly and take this long shot of you walking across the ice. And it was the most extraordinary moment in my life, because I was out there in the sunshine on frozen Lake Baikal, alone on the planet, just me, alone, not a sound, nothing, couldn't hear the helicopter or anything. And it was a real kind of, human moment for me that I'll never, ever forget. So the technology, the science, of course, was exciting and it was riveting, but we got ourselves into some extraordinary places. And I'm really grateful to Tomorrow's World for allowing me to have those experiences.
And Mark, a short one for you, but you're not allowed to ask him about any of his clothes, right? We've done that.
No, I was just thinking this is my last question. I'm going to be slightly cruel and ask. I'm fascinated to know who was your favourite co-presenter. Who did you just work with that you just loved that time together?
Oh, that's tricky. Now, you see, there'll be a fight because I still am very good pals with Judith Han and Maggie Philbin. Talked to Maggie just the other day. I'm going to see her in a few weeks' time when I'm in London.
Lovely.
Judith Han is godmother to my oldest daughter, who's now 31. And Judith came out. I live in the United States, as I mentioned. She came out to stay with us for 2 weeks, not very long ago.
Oh.
So it has to be an equal tie there, otherwise there'll be fights.
I'm happy with that. I love that you're all friends. I think that's brilliant.
Yeah. Super questions. Thank you so much for this, lads. Really, really like this. So I'm just going to ask you, Howard, how do you fill your time these days? What do you get up to? I'm sure there are books and ledgers, and I'm sure there's a raft of stuff in the attic we'd all love to see.
Yeah, so I use my experiences with the BBC generally and Tomorrow's World in particular to tell stories around leadership of all things. I do a lot of work with an organisation called the Centre for Creative Leadership, and I try to develop leaders from all kinds of not-for-profits, for-profits, and I use all the stories from Tomorrow's World and the scrapes and the wonderful things that happen to us as broadcasters to illuminate the content as we go through how to develop yourself as a leader, leading other people, which is a complex thing to do.
So as a leader, are you happy with us saying good night to you now, and then what we're going to do is talk about you behind your back for the next 24 and a bit minutes? Are you okay with that?
I'm fine with that because the technology now allows me to listen to everything you say, even though I'm 5,000 miles away. You're not going to get away with it.
Oh, fantastic. Where in the world are you exactly, Howard?
I am in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and I've lived here for 25 years.
Well, listen, to you and all your family, a massive Happy New Year. This has genuinely made our evenings. I know it's made mine, but poor Russ and Mark are going to explode at any stage. So thank you to you.
Russ and Mark, keep up the good work, Russ and Mark. I listen in from time to time. And Connor, it's been a pleasure to meet you, and Happy New Year to you all.
Thank you to you. That was great. Lads, how was that? That was brilliant, wasn't it?
Incredible.
Oh, that was
Thank you very much. That was
is he
privilege.
definitely hung up?
Let me just check. Yes, he's definitely gone. Right, let's go through some of these. Right? Because the episode itself, we're going to be talking about some of the things that were predicted in a Tomorrow's World episode. If you have just tuned in, from 30 years ago, it was trying to foretell what was going to happen in 2025. And here we are. Electric cars were on the agenda, but they're still very much a big topic in 2025.
By 2012, London's orbital motorway had become a 10-lane monster.
Successive governments refused to impose punitive taxation on private car ownership, and frequent attempts to persuade people to give up their cars in favour of public transport failed miserably.
For years, Tomorrow's World has been rather optimistically promising the arrival of the performance electric car.
This vehicle can actually manage 55 miles at 30 miles an hour between charges.
But the battery breakthrough needed to solve that woeful lack of power and distance just hasn't materialised, and no one wants a car that won't go far. They never made it into our hearts or onto our highways.
So instead of an electrical revolution, there was an evolution of the good old internal combustion engine, now with much lower emissions thanks to advanced electronic management systems that make the engines vastly more efficient.
All new models are at least 90% recyclable, and most of the bodywork is made of an almost frictionless plastic. So as well as improving the car's aerodynamics, it's so slippery that dirt simply can't stick to it.
Welcome to the world of the permanently pristine vehicle. What on earth will we do with our Sunday mornings?
Even back in the 90s, there was more computing power in the family saloon than in the first lunar landing module. Today, they're even smarter.
So how can we use these super intelligent motors? Well, cut out the middleman and let them drive themselves.
On the latest of Britain's new automated Z routes, cars use sensors to keep a constant distance from each other, braking and accelerating in perfect harmony. And these aren't the only roads where the spontaneity's been taken out of motoring. Nowadays, all drivers have to file drive plans, like a pilot's flight plan. Driving at peak times will cost, and city centre journeys could break the bank.
Of course, you could always take a cab. Rather more intimidating than the little black number they're finally replacing, these are the latest taxis to hit the roads, complete with spray-on designer dirt.
This future retro look's inspired by the classic 90s movie Judge Dredd.
But you know, not everything's changed.
You'll never guess who I had in the back of this the other day.
This is brilliant. This is so good. Russell and Mark, let me start with this. Trying to get people to give up their cars is proving difficult. No one wants a car that won't go far, and driving in cities at peak times will cost. Nailed it in those regards, didn't it?
Absolutely bang on the money. Yes, yeah, totally. It's an unsolvable problem as long as there are so many cars on the road. The solution is not more cars. The solution is more trains. But but that's not covered in this particular segment. Yeah.
I'm quite baffled by how close they got there. But was it a bit foretold, or did they just get very well educated there?
The thing I find most interesting about this episode, I think I said earlier, Connor, is how brave some of the predictions are. It would have been very easy to kind of think of positive things for going forward, but actually they kind of really double down on the idea that EV cars don't really take off. And I thought it was really interesting the way this whole bit is kind of passed with that kind of sense of skepticism. And I think in general, I think EV cars have taken off more than this show predicted, but the complexity of them or the anxiety, and I know Russ, we were talking earlier, was talking about kind of range anxiety, the idea that people have that you can't quite take the cars, or you can't trust that you can go all the way on, one charge, is still very much a part of the conversation at the moment. And as you said earlier, Connie, that kind of sense that, that there is that policy discussion around private car ownership, I don't know, I thought it was really fascinating. But even just the idea, this the really simple throwaway line that the M25 is a 10-lane monster. And, we're at the point now where around Heathrow Airport, I think there's 12 and 14 lanes. So, even that kind of undercooks just how big some of these motorways are. Yeah.
Absolutely amazing. So, Russell, earlier on, you said you were talking about the fact that the internet, you were at the infancy of the internet in 1995. Well, the World Wide Web was really taken off. A development tomorrow's world thought would bring, were they right, future trouble?
I would say so, yes. What in terms of cyber attacks and things like that? Is that what we're talking about?
Well, tell you what, let's play this wee clip here about cyber war, if we possibly can, right? And
it all started in California, 1969, with the internet. By 1995, an estimated 40 million people used the computer network. Huge amounts of information traveled across the world in seconds. People were astounded.
Retailing was the first industry to wake up to its potential. Traditional shopping seemed archaic in the face of its future.
We've gone from local corner shop to catalogue hypermarkets, and now to this.
Once money started crossing the internet, the banks wanted to make it secure. By the year 2000, the business barons took control. It was renamed the Supernet, and access was severely limited.
The computer users who'd enjoyed the freedom of the old internet for years became bitter at these new restrictions. Some resorted to hacking and electronic terrorism.
Electronic money was spirited out of bank accounts around the world, while a new generation of computer viruses mutated out of control.
By 2020, security on the networks had been fortified. But there are many who think that it's only a matter of time before the terrorists learn to beat the system once again.
The internet is a bit like the ocean in which life first developed. Computer viruses are a form of life that can survive in this ocean and can reproduce themselves. At the moment, we still have control because we can switch the internet off. But that may not always be the case.
You can switch the internet off, I'm afraid not. Business barons take control of the internet. Russell, hard to disagree.
Very hard to disagree. Yes, yeah. I think in this they say that the business barons sort of are deliberately restricting people from the internet. I don't think that's exactly what's happened. I think what's happened is that the big internet companies have become so big and so ubiquitous that people only really use their services. Like Google has hoovered up so many functions that the sort of the smaller internet sites have all kind of disappeared. So in that respect, that is how they've sort of brought all of their control into this sort of large sort of supernet of their own. So that's what gives them their sort of extreme power, and then that is what allows them to sort of control the information in the way that they do these days.
Mark, hacking, electronic terrorism and computer viruses playing a huge role in our existence. They got that one right as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because actually, as I was listening back to it there, it dawned on me that they're talking about cyberspace, and actually they talk about the internet as if it's a space, where I think we see it more as a tool now. And so that idea that I think it's Shahnaz Pakavan he's doing the voiceover. She talks about cyber riots, and this is this idea that some activity on the internet has led to real life riots in the streets, which hasn't been an issue. But then the fact that it's a tool, it means that it has become an area where the crimes that we know in real life have just been replicated on the internet. So theft, grifting, fraud. And then, that kind of cyber terrorism. But actually, funny, what's missing, and even just thinking about the business barons and what Russell and yourself were saying there, is like we see a picture of Rupert Murdoch is the example they give. And of course, the internet has kind of removed them from power in a certain way and brought in new people like Musk and Peter Thiel and Zuckerberg, who now own this space. And still, though, the thing that I think that this misses, which I think is really interesting, is that state actors are still kind of the big driver of some of this activity. We talk about the impact that Russia and North Korea has, and they are attacking other states now through this new cyberspace that that they don't control directly, but they're using it to advance their aims, which I think this is missing. But I don't know how you necessarily have predicted that, because actually just one statistic I found was that Shahnaz at the start there says, I think there's 40 million people who are using the internet around the world. In 2024, it was estimated that 69% of the population of the world were using the internet, which is 5.5 billion people. It's like that level of expansion, I think, means that, it's remarkable how much they got right.
In the business world, as we talked about, computer viruses, electronic terrorism, that then leads on to business banking and us putting our money in the internet and putting our money in technology. We've touched on money and online banking security, but then they talked about access to said money. Have a listen to this.
Initial resistance to IDs was sidestepped with the introduction of the DNA numbering system.
It seems we always were the number. We were born with our own personal ID.
Welcome to Barlin's Bank. Scanning arm ID chip now. How can I help you, Mrs. Morrow?
Well, will I ever see a human in a bank again?
I don't understand.
Well, there's a surprise. Try this. Withdraw 100 euro marks.
Command accepted. Enjoy your day.
The leap in banking technology early in the 21st century saw the fledgling financial centres in Bombay and Moscow expand to the point where they were dubbed the Wall Streets of the East.
So banks in New York, London and Tokyo decided to work 24 hours a day. Huge daylight lamps were installed in the financial areas of the three cities. Bankers could then react instantly to any situation, anywhere in the world, at any time. With no need to end the day, the money kept rolling in.
I'm going to continue just pointing out the things that they've got phenomenally correct here, right? And by all means, lads, just jump in at any stage. DNA numbering system, which we didn't actually ever have to really get to so far because we've got our fingerprints. There's sometimes eye scanners. And Howard Stableford himself earlier on said he paid for his groceries with the palm of his hand. Will I ever see a human in the bank again? I rolled my eyes with irony there, because it seems, no, all the banks, specifically where I live, they're gone now. There's a banking hub, and it has like one person that deals with like 4 or 5 banks, and 24-hour banking. Back to what you were saying earlier on, Mark, that the internet is more of a service rather than a place. That's one thing that they kind of got right, but had kind of pivoted a little bit. Very interesting again, lads.
It is, isn't it? Yeah.
My main concern with the idea of linking your financial accounts to parts of your body is the fear that if somebody wants to rob you, they're going to have to remove that part of your body in order to do it. I mean, if I was Howard, I would be concerned now that if I can place things in the palm of my hand, people would be trying to chop my hand off. So that's always been a concern of mine. I think
Happy New Year, everybody! If you just tuned in, Happy New Year.
I suppose we are predicting a spate of hand thefts in Colorado Springs, aren't we? So yeah.
Yeah, we could be laughing. Someone could be listening back to this radio show in 30 years' time, going, "Well, you know what happened."
Oh, yeah, that's true. I hadn't thought about that. Oh, gosh, what's good for the goose, right? I suppose what's interesting about this whole thing for me, though, was it's they talk about the Thai ID card system, which is still in place and kind of was started in 1946, I think, no, 1943, and is now actually you get one when you're 7. And I was kind of thinking about that idea, like they talk about the chip here, and Russell's right. You know, do you lose your arm if somebody robs you? When do you get the chip? You know, how old are you when you get this chip? And I was kind of remembering when I was 16, I got my national insurance number. It was a little card that came through the post. I suppose I probably did feel a bit addled. But now, of course, like, would you be marched down to the doctor to get your mandatory chip? And then there was that idea of that kind of, you know, what becomes mandatory and you know, what is voluntary. And it kind of reminded me that one of the consequences of the 2010 election was that the coalition government, one of the very first things they did was scrap the previous government's national identity cards. And as many as 15,000 were rolled out. So, you know, it was only just spooling up. But, you know, we're all old enough to remember that was a really controversial thing, because it was that idea of like the government tracking you, or you having this one number. But as we were discussing earlier, you don't have that one number. We don't have an identity card here in the UK. But my God, you carry around with you so much that can be tracked and so much that contains information. And we voluntarily, you know, our phones are rich with the kind of information that, you know, no one could have imagined you could hold in a simple card. And that goes to, you know, as you say, you know, it knows my face. It knows, my, you know, my computer knows my fingerprint. It's incredible how much we've kind of allowed, because ultimately a lot of these things, like Howard going to the shop and using his hand, they do make things easier. But, you know, there is that question that kind of hovers all over these things that I suppose maybe we don't necessarily like to think about too hard. Though there is one miss in this, Connor. The idea that the banking district of London would have a giant kind of dome with lights so that it was daytime all the time so that you could compete with Bangkok and Moscow. I think we can put that one in the didn't happen category.
Yeah, they use that crafty internet we were talking about earlier on instead.
Exactly.
I'm very conscious there are people who've just tuned in now and we're playing this out and they're going, what is this? Is this an episode of Black Mirror? This is a dystopian look at something that potentially will happen or did happen. So we found an episode of Tomorrow's World, which was produced in 1995, which predicted what would happen in 2025. And they did it almost as if they were actors and things were happening. They played it as real. And if you've just missed it, Howard Stableford, who was one of the presenters in this show, has already been on the programme. So you can listen to this all back on BBC Sounds, which is a futuristic thing that you use where you can listen back to radio, I think. So listen, I want to go into the ridiculous now, right? Space. And fans of Dune films might be familiar with the concept of mining in space for financial gain or power. In fact, the Alien franchise often followed spacecraft teams looking to make financial gain by mining across space, often with not so satisfying results when a big alien pops out of your chest. Anyway, this is what the program said about asteroid mining and where it would be in 2025.
Early this morning, a pilotless space tug touched down on a South African airstrip. Its payload, estimated to be worth $20 billion on the open market, is the first haul of precious metals mined from an asteroid. It started 16 years ago, Resources were dwindling on Earth, so an international consortium of mining companies decided to turn to space. A 5-year survey of asteroids orbiting close to Earth revealed 2 with ample stocks of platinum and gold.
They settled on one, Midas, a rocky 1-kilometer wide flying mountain said to contain 400,000 tons of precious metals, far more than has ever been dug up on Earth in the whole of human history.
Just 1 year ago, the unmanned complex that mines and refines the valuable metals from Midas started production. Magnetic conveyor belts on tracks suck grains of metal from the asteroid's crumbly surface. When it's up to full speed, the mine should churn out enough ore to send a fully loaded space tug back to Earth once every 10 days. But in space, not everything that glisters is gold.
In 1981, I was privileged to witness the launch of the very first space shuttle. Now, back in those days, getting into space was more a matter of national pride than calculated business. Those were carefree days, and governments literally threw money into orbit.
Russell, they may have got some of the story of the 1998 film Armageddon in there, I feel. Bruce Willis and Ben Affleck potentially up mining for billions of pounds worth of stuff. It hasn't happened, but I don't know, a part of me, with what's happening with SpaceX, and you mentioned Elon Musk and many others earlier on, it's not beyond the realms of possibility, is it?
Well, this is the thing. This is the sort of thing that I would hope would be happening. But it's a very expensive. And
but you also thought you were going to be a millionaire as well. You see, you thought you were going to be a millionaire by mining in space, did you?
Well, exactly. Colin, it could still happen. It could still happen. But yes, I mean, the thing is, wherever there's money, that will always lure in, people trying to get it. It is potentially the biggest gold rush humanly possible. There's currently 700 known asteroids in space that are valued at over $100 trillion each because of the amount of minerals inside them. So it's this huge unexplored sort of way of making money, and that that's a huge driver of human innovation. So I can see it definitely happening. We just need to get the right technology. But also I think it would be positive for humanity because there's a lot of problems on Earth at the moment due to fights over resources. You have wars over resources. I think Ukraine itself has a lot of rare earth elements in it, and that's been suggested that may be one of the motives for why people fight over it so much. And obviously mining causes lots of pollution, and there's bad working conditions and things like that. But if we've got a load of robots to do it in space for us, it'll solve all those problems, overnight.
Can I just be slightly sobering thought here? Yeah, I was just going to say, because I love that you're both so optimistic about space mining. As of last year, which is now 2024, I looked it up. 127 grams of asteroid material has successfully been brought back to Earth from space, which is the same weight as a medium-sized Malteser Easter egg. And other chocolate eggs are available, but this Easter, when you're looking around the supermarkets, pick that. That's what you can imagine has been brought back. So we are way away, I think, from kind of a $10 billion haul coming back every 10 days.
Give us another 50 years, Mark, I reckon. 50 to 75 years.
You might be too old then, Ross.
He's still trying to be a millionaire. He thought he was going to be a millionaire. It might happen. Let's finish with this one if we possibly can. When we talk about space, these days we're obviously talking about satellites. Something that we have heard a little bit of over the last decade or so is what happens to those satellites when they're no longer in use. What do you do with them? Well, space junk was a thing on this episode of Tomorrow's World. Let's have a quick look at the recklessness of humans for financial gain in space.
Right from the start, mankind has been making a mess in space. Gloves, fragments from old satellites, all bowling along at around 10 kilometers a second. Soon, these scrap metal bullets were knocking satellites out of commission. Shuttle windows were shattered by flecks of paint. Last year, astronaut Scott Dyson became space junk's first victim, blown apart by a stray bolt the size of a pea. The disaster shocked the World Space Agencies into resurrecting plans that had been shelved years before as too ambitious. A gigantic foam gel now orbits close to space station Beta. As debris hits the gel, it's slowed down and then burns up as it enters the atmosphere. In 10 years or so, they say, space will once again be safe. But until then, all the astronauts can do is keep their fingers crossed.
I think they were doing a bit of a playing at Alien, at movies like that when they did this one. As we've got about 30 seconds left. This last one, it's ridiculously brilliant. I think were they trying to do a little bit of drama towards the tail end of this episode?
They've predicted the film Gravity, haven't they? Clearly.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But
the glamour of space. Yeah.
I looked into what the solution is for this, and they're not using a gel, but they're planning to use a wonderful thing called a laser broom. That's going to sweep everything out of orbit using lasers. And as we all know, lasers are the best way of solving all technological problems.
Lads, can I say a massive thank you to both of you? Obviously, we want to say thank you to Howard Stableford, who was on earlier on, former presenter of Tomorrow's World. Your podcast, Tomorrow's World Audit Time, is available, I imagine, where you get your podcasts.
Absolutely,
everywhere.
Yes.
Of course.
Yes.
Lads, it's been brilliant. Russell
you,
Cope and Mark Agnew, who are co-presenters of said podcast. This has been absolutely fascinating. I've loved every second of this here. Where can we get this episode? Can we see this episode anywhere?
I believe there's clips online on the BBC. The BBC Archive have uploaded various clips online, but I'm not sure you can see the whole episode anywhere.
Right, dig in and have fun. Yeah.
Listen back to this entire hour's worth of radio. Lads, thank you so much for looking after me tonight. Thank you very much for allowing me to delve into what you do. Thank you. Same to you. Thank you to everyone who's been working behind the glass. Look, working so hard.